All right. Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to be talking about professional communication, and I really use those terms of professional communication and effective communication interchangeably throughout this presentation because effective communication is professional communication and vice versa. Professional communication is effective communication. So really, interchangeable terms. If you're communicating effectively, you are communicating professionally. So just a little bit about myself. My name is Matt Bush. I'm the Community Inclusion Manager here at VPI. Been in that role now for 6 months as we are trying to move the community inclusion initiative and aspect of our programming here at VPI forward. So I've had a great opportunity to work on community outings, to work on community speakers that we're bringing into VPI, and also taking outings to those speakers. And then also the third component of community inclusion, which is group support and employment. I've enjoyed this role immensely in working with a number of you throughout the course of it. So looking forward to this training as another aspect of that community inclusion position. And then also this training is supported by a grant through HCBS and the ARPA funds. So just wanted to mention that, and we're so grateful for that opportunity. I want to start with a little analogy here, and some of you may have seen the movie Castaway, and here we have Tom Hanks, who is looking very I don't know what you'd want to call him at this point, but he is yelling at this volleyball that has actually little morbid, but on the volleyball is his hand, which he put into it after he had some blood on his hand. So that's blood, but he made a face on the volleyball. And what we have here is Tom Hanks in this movie Castaway was on this desert island, and he was really lonely, obviously, as we all would be. He was finding ways to get food and water, but one of his greatest needs was communication. And this volleyball, this Wilson volleyball, hence the name Wilson, washed up on the beach. So in a moment of ingenuity, I guess you could say, he decided to make Wilson into his friend and started to have really a relationship and communicate with Wilson. He was talking to Wilson each and every day. And actually, in one of the other trainings, I show a clip where Wilson is floating away, and you can hear Tom Hanks yelling, "I'm sorry, Wilson," as Wilson floats away in the ocean. Really, it's a very powerful scene because it underscores a point that I want us to really think about at the onset here, is that communication is absolutely fundamental. I think it is as fundamental, really, it's right there with food and water. And Castaway, I think, underscores that he needed someone or something in this case to communicate with, and Wilson fulfilled that need. So throughout our life, we want to continue to try to improve our communication, not just in our professional career, although this is geared more towards that, but just for our personal life. Our relationships in many different areas will be positively impacted if we improve our communication. And I hope today that we can do that. So how are we going to do that? The goals of today's session will be the following. We'll discover common communication mistakes and how to remedy them. This is actually building on some common communication mistakes that were shared with us by the J.J. Keller Corporation, and another presentation that I presented with my colleague, Michelle, on communication as well to our internal team here at VPI. So using some of that information, I hope that will be helpful to you, and you can discover some of the mistakes that you may have made just to let the pressure off. I've made all of these mistakes many, many times over, and I've learned from them, and I hope that you can do the same to understand that you can learn from and grow from your mistakes. We're going to learn how to conduct a difficult conversation. I have a template that I discovered when I was going through some training on a book called Fierce Conversations by Susan Scott. And this is a template that I'm going to present to everyone. And it is a very awesome tool that you can use to kind of take some of that pressure and some of that anxiety out of having a difficult conversation, whether it be here at work, in your professional setting, or in your personal life. And then finally, we're going to be talking about improved email etiquette. Not necessarily the big fireworks topic, but something very important as it pertains to professional communication, and probably something that some people will overlook from time to time. So we want to talk about email etiquette to round out the goals of today's session. So why is effective communication so important? I want you to think about that for a moment. And we talked about the fundamental nature of communication, but communication takes on a lot of different forms, and it's not always effective. There's a lot of different ways that you can communicate. We could even go back to the Wilson volleyball analogy and say maybe that wasn't the most effective form of communication because it was a one-way street, and you could look at things like that, but also things like yelling, things like not listening, what are these ineffective forms of communication? It's out there, but it's not necessarily always effective. In an earlier session, someone made the comment that we're really communicating at all times. It just is a matter of if it's effective. There's things like gossip. There's things like negative self-talk or even talking to others. These are forms of communication, but they're not effective and they're not helpful. Communication really is, to get back to this idea of being fundamental. It's the infrastructure of our relationships. It's the thing that our relationships are built on. You think about the building you're in. If you're in an industrial building, it's got studs that are made of metal if it's up to code, or if you're at home, studs that are made of wood, and you have roofing trusses and shingles or some sort of metal roof that makes up the structure that you are in. Or if you're very lucky, you're outside, and maybe this analogy won't work for you, but think about communication in that same way as it relates to a relationship. It is the things, the materials, the drywall, the flooring that actually makes up those relationships. It's the infrastructure. It's absolutely critical that we communicate if we want to develop relationships. And without effective communication, we really cannot have those effective and healthy relationships. We all want healthy relationships in our lives. We want those around us to feel supported. We want to feel supported. We want to be in healthy, effective, useful relationships. And it's done through effective and professional communication. So here's a question, and if you would like to, you can throw a comment in the chat, but just something for you to think about. What communication mistakes have you witnessed in the workplace? And no names with this. You can throw that in the chat if you'd like to talk about anything that is particularly maybe funny, or something that had a profound impact that was very enlightening to you. Maybe you learned from that mistake, or something that you feel like maybe was never corrected at a past employer, or something you're working on even right now. And then secondly, what communication mistakes have you made in the workplace? This won't get you in trouble for admitting it. So I admit this. I may share some examples throughout this of times I've made mistakes. But I certainly, as I mentioned earlier, have made each and every one of these mistakes that we are going to talk about today. And I hope that I've learned from them. I still make mistakes to this day, but I'm trying to continue to get better. So this really practice of communication and this task of communication that we all have as humans, that's as fundamental, really, I'm arguing, as food and water, is something that we're going to continue to work on throughout our life. We're never going to have arrived at being necessarily a master communicator, and that's okay. So let's talk about what the experts say as it pertains to some of the major communication mistakes that occur in a professional setting. Now, this list that we're going to go through is not all inclusive. It's not every single mistake that could be made. It's not like a top five necessarily, but these are very common. And I think that they encompass the great majority, I would think, of communication mistakes that happen. So we're going to talk first and foremost about ignoring the issue. So ignoring the issue is picking and choosing what we feel is important to address. So to a certain extent, this makes a lot of sense. We have to pick and choose what we can address. You know, we're not all over the place. We don't have unlimited times. We don't have unlimited resources. We have a 24-hour day that we have to work within, and we have to be understanding of that. Not every single thing that comes across our proverbial desk needs to be dealt with by us. However, we need to choose wisely the things that we do address. And we have to get away from this idea of ignoring the issue. We need to understand that issues, when they are ignored, whether they're minor personal problems or major company policy infractions, these type of things tend to grow rather than going away. Now, there are some things that, as I said, you are going to have to let pass by, and even some things that you're going to have to wait on. We're going to talk a little bit about that with another communication mistake. But ignoring the issue will not get resolution. So with this, there was an example that I went over in some of the other classes, and had an example about a top salesperson, and I've encountered this with individuals that I've oversaw in the past, that maybe the individual is very integral to the team, and maybe they're doing things like being late. Maybe they're doing things like not abiding by the dress code of the business, and lo and behold, you have pause about addressing these issues because the individual um, maybe is so integral to the business. These are instances where if we don't address these things, they will not go away. They'll tend to grow, and they'll tend to actually spread. And pretty soon, before we know it, the culture of our company may be, everybody, it's okay, it's acceptable to be 5 minutes late, and it's acceptable to not really listen to what the supervisor has to say, or not really respect each other's wishes as we're going about our daily tasks. These are very big, fundamental cultural issues that we want to avoid in our workplace. We want to make sure that we're addressing things when they're small and easily addressed rather than ignoring the issue. Secondly, close to ignoring the issue would be dancing around the issue. You're not entirely ignoring the issue, but you are addressing it in a way that's overly general. You're maybe pulling together a group when a when a small group, maybe you, the individual, and HR or something like that, should just be involved. You're just a one-on-one conversation, but you're speaking in generalities. Maybe there is a issue, and I used this example in the past. Maybe there's an issue where someone yells at a client, and this could have been addressed by a coworker and said, hey, we need to make sure that we're not doing that. We want to de-escalate situations rather than escalate them or something like that. We could have handled it this way. And maybe even just some coworker to coworker mentoring, and this is the way we do things here, kind of conversation. Or maybe it comes to the attention of a manager, and that manager, instead of going and having a one-on-one conversation with that employee, maybe there's something to the extent that is said, well, in a group meeting, let's have a presentation on customer service. And that is not addressing the issue really at all. And oftentimes what happens in those situations is the individual that we're actually trying to address, they're not going to get the message. It's not direct. We're dancing around it. They may pick up some good tips, but we want to directly address them so that they can learn and grow from this. We want to take the confrontation out of it as much as possible, but remember that earlier lesson of small issues don't just go away, they tend to get bigger. So we don't want to dance around it. We don't want to speak in generalities. We want to address the issue. Now, our third thing is flying by the seat of their pants. Oftentimes people will do this because they think that everything that comes up at work needs an immediate response. I need to immediately respond to this, otherwise people will think that I'm not a good professional. I'm being tardy in my response. I'm not taking things seriously. That could not be further from the truth. Now, we will talk in email etiquette about a good timeline for when emails should be addressed. And sometimes there's different types of situations that may come up. I talk about an example of, we had an individual a while back in one of our programs that had gotten on the wrong, or gotten in the wrong van, was taken to a different location. And then, everyone was alerted. This individual's not where they should be. Thought they may have run away. Figured it out that this individual had gotten on the wrong van, and it was resolved. It was resolved well. However, that would be an instance, that's an emergency. That requires your immediate response. Apart from things like that, which will probably be one, maybe as much as 5% of the things that you're dealing with on a daily basis, if that many, you are going to have time. And that is actually in your, great, I'm looking for the word, that's in your favor. You want that time. You need that time to respond to things in a way that's going to be professional and helpful. We don't want to jump to conclusions, get too caught up in our emotions and rush to judgment, or blow up at people, other employees, our supervisors, of course, clients. And that's what happens when we're rushing around trying to answer things too quickly. We want to take time in addressing all difficult conversations, and really any conversation. Of course, like I had said, sometimes it might just be a quick email that we're able to, there's not a lot of information we need to gather. But when it's more than that, actually take the time to address it. Don't rush that response. Our fourth mistake that we can sometimes make with communication is hearing but not listening. It's rare for people these days to actually give their undivided attention to you. It's definitely something that comes across quite a bit. And we want to make sure that we are actually giving people our undivided attention. There's instances where, maybe even during this presentation, or we're listening to a podcast trying to learn about a concept where we can we can do two things at once. We can do some multitasking. But when we're having a situation where it's a difficult conversation, someone is maybe telling us something that could be sensitive, we need to make sure that we're giving that person our undivided attention. In one-on-one conversations, this is incredibly critical. Some of the things that can distract us are phone calls, job duties, our mind is elsewhere. These are things that get in the way. Be present in that conversation. Be present in that moment. You're going to deal with the situation at hand, which is that person standing right in front of you, and the tasks that you have to do later on. You're going to deal with both of those much more effectively when you are dealing with one thing at a time rather than trying to divide your brain up into all these different areas. And here's another thing that we do. Sometimes we interrupt others when they're giving us important information. We need to stop ourselves and really work on this one. This is one that I know for sure that I do. I've definitely had that feedback from my wife and from others, and I work on this. I mentally think about this in a conversation, and I'm not always great at it. Maybe you've run into this with me before, but I really try to let the other person finish giving the important information that they're trying to give. Uh, Additionally, this is an incredibly important tool. One thing that I failed to mention at the onset is, and it applies to this tool, try to come away from a presentation like this with one or two really good nuggets that you think that you can take away, that you think that you can implement. Everything that we're going through, it may not apply to you. Everything that we're going through, it may not be something that is helpful necessarily, or maybe you've mastered some of these things. But this is a nugget that I hope that you can take away from this, is summarizing what you believe was said and asking for clarification. Something to the effect of saying the phrase, so what you're saying is whatever they just told you. So what you're saying is you're going to need to go home early today because you have a bad migraine. Understanding exactly what was said, that actually might not be what the person is saying. They may just be saying, no, I could hang out in my office for a half an hour, and then we can and maybe work on some emails, and we can assess at that point. But you may be jumping to the conclusion that because you're cutting them off or you misheard something, that they're asking to go home. So that tool of, so what you're saying is a great tool to use to dispel any confusion. This is also a great de-escalation tool. So when someone is escalated, oftentimes one of the issues that they're having is that they don't feel understood. They don't feel like people are hearing them. So using the phrase, so what you're saying, can be an incredibly powerful way of de-escalating that person and give the sense to them that this individual that is listening to me is on my side. We're working together on the issue. And that's really what you want to do. You want to take yourself out of an adversarial role when you're in that de-escalation situation. The final mistake of communication that we're going to talk about today is failing to document. Rarely, if ever, are you going to run into a scenario where you're going to say, man, I documented way too much today. You may say that because you're done with the notes. That's an entirely different situation. But what I mean by that is documentation helps you out, will save you so often. I can't count on the amount of times. I can't count the amount of times that documentation has come through to save me and say, oh, I'm so glad I wrote that down. I'm so glad I documented that. That makes this task so much easier. This is a piece of information that if I had not documented it, it would be lost to the annals of my forgetfulness, or whatever you would like to say. You will not regret documenting conversations or events. And even if you're into like things like journaling or just jotting things down, notes, even during a presentation like this, you can always go back to those things, and they're really neat to see what was said. Now, when it comes to documenting in the professional setting that we're in the human services realm and world, consult with your manager and coworkers that have maybe been there a little bit longer than you have about the various responsibilities and what the contracts that you're working under say as far as documentation goes. Anytime you need to remember details of a conversation or event, obviously that's a time when you should pull out the computer, pull out the writing pad, and just go ahead and document that. Documentation provides a history that will help you solve and resolve many workplace issues, to kind of put a period and exclamation point really on this. So we want to talk briefly about the 3 Ps of communication. And the first one is preparation. Anytime that we are going to be addressing a conversation or addressing some form of communication, there is going to be a level of preparation. I prepared for this presentation. I prepare for conversations that I'm going to have with people. It can range anywhere from just a few minutes to mentally think about what you're going to say or what topics may be addressed, all the way up to writing down verbatim every word that you're going to present in front of a large audience, because you want to make sure that you get your points across. In addition to that, you're going to want to practice. And practice is actually something that you think, well, how would one practice communication? You're doing it every single day. But what I want you to do is I want you to become intentional about it and think about the fact of, I want to be a better communicator today. You don't have to look in the mirror and say that every single day. That would be weird. And I just, I guess if it would work for you to be a better communicator, I won't judge. Go ahead and do it. But no, just practice being a better communicator by thinking, okay, that didn't work. I'm going to do this instead next time a scenario like that happens. I've tried to do that throughout my career, of making different mistakes. And if you're going to have a long professional career, you're going to make mistakes. What makes you a successful communicator is not the fact that you're perfect, but the fact that you're willing to say, okay, I'm going to learn from this mistake. That's what practice is all about. Learning from mistakes, or learning from people who do things the right way and saying, I want to model myself after that, or learning from yourself doing it the right way. Hey, that worked out really good. I'm going to do that in the future. I'm going to do more of that type of thing. And then it takes persistence. Don't get discouraged. Don't think that you can't be a good communicator. Never think that, you're just not cut out for this. You are, and you can. It's that old saying that we say, if you say you can't, you can't. But the flip side of that is, if you say you can, you can. Each and every person can be a good communicator. Of course, it's going to look different. In our field, we work with some clients that are quote unquote nonverbal. Some people may say that they're not good communicators just by the virtue of them being nonverbal, but we all know that not to be the case. There's some very great communicators out there who are nonverbal. They learn to adapt and overcome their disability and develop great abilities in other areas of communication. We have to do the same if we have strengths and weaknesses. So to dig a little bit deeper on preparation, really the final bullet point, I should have reconfigured these. The final bullet point of why should be number one. Why should I address the issue? As I said earlier, in ignoring the issue, dancing around the issue, you are not going to address every single thing that comes across your desk on a daily basis. You're not going to address every single thing in your personal relationships. There may be some things that you don't have to address. They go away, or they're not really something that needs to have a comment by you, or they're not something that needs to be changed. It's just the way it is, and that's okay. But there are a lot of situations that do need to be addressed. And if you are dealing with something that needs to be addressed, go through the mental practice of saying, do I need to be involved with this? I'm dealing with something right now in my own personal life, and I'm thinking about this, and I'm bouncing this off of individuals, people that that I trust, that are great sounding boards. And this is a great thing for you to do as well. Sometimes consult. Should I address this? Should I not address this? But I'm going through this process currently with a situation that I'm working on right now about an issue. So who needs to be involved in the communication? Who should all be a part of it? Is it something that's just a one-on-one? Is it something that you as a manager, or maybe it's about your manager? Do you need to include HR? Do you need to call the parents and an employer and pull together a big group of people to address something that's going on in the workplace with an employee of that business that you happen to be working with? And then where should I address it? Make sure that if you can, use the easiest way and the easiest form of communication. If it also is another E word, the most effective. Just because something is easy to do doesn't mean it's always going to be the most effective. And you really want to hit that sweet spot of being easy to do, easy for everyone to participate, and then also effective. So email, in person, text message. I heard throughout this training, I heard somebody was still having to mail letters. That still does exist. And that was an accommodation that Guardian had asked for. So this individual is communicating via letters. So what is going to be, or what medium is going to be the best way to communicate? And then when should I address the issue? Always give it some time unless it's an emergency situation, but is it something that needs to be addressed within 24 hours? Is it something that needs to be addressed after something happens? Maybe this individual has a very tough day or a tough week planned, maybe something like a surgery or medical procedure, and you're aware of that. You say, okay, we're going to wait until that difficult situation passes, and then we're going to address it. Sometimes you don't always have that, luxury. Sometimes you have to address things right away, giving yourself time to go through the process of preparation, of course, but after that, you're needing to address it. So you determine this is when I need to address it. It needs to be done after my preparation is complete, or it can wait maybe after this particular event or for a different time. So before we enter any kind of conversation with individuals, and this is really related more towards the difficult conversations, maybe where we're having to confront a behavior, something bad has happened, wrong has happened, someone's maybe lacking in performance, whatever it may be. Remember a lesson from an earlier training that we talked about. Make the other person feel important. And really, how we do this is do unto others as you would have them do unto you. The person that is sitting across from you is a human being with all the worth and value of yourself as another human being. Do you like to be yelled at? Do you like to be talked down to? Do you like to have, when something doesn't go right, do you like to have it rubbed in your face? These are things we all don't really enjoy. So don't do that to the individuals that you're dealing with. I understand there are mistakes. We're not always on our A game, but do your best to treat others as you would have them treat you. If we use this as a guide, it will help us immensely. How would I how would I like someone to treat my family member? How would I like someone to treat me? Think about these things as you're getting into these difficult conversations. So this is the template that I described for those who are joining us here on Microsoft Teams, and then as this will be uploaded to YouTube later on, for the Microsoft Teams folks, this will be in our files that you can access this in the HCBS training. For those who are on YouTube, there should be a link in the description box where you'll be able to access this. So this is a template of a difficult conversation. This is something that I've used, I feel like, fairly successfully since I've learned about it. I've used this in a number of instances, and I'm actually writing down the answers or writing down notes around these different areas. So this opening statement is maybe about 60 seconds to a little bit over a minute, maybe 2 minutes or so. And you're actually going through all of these things as an opening statement. Um, And then when you get to the next step, you're actually interacting with the individual that you're bringing this difficult conversation up with, and you're doing a lot of asking questions. You're digging for full understanding. And then you're going to use that phrase that we talked about earlier. So what you're saying is, and then you'll restate what the individual is saying, maybe the solution that they're proposing, maybe their side of the story, and then you move on to the resolution stage. You talk about what was learned, how you can move forward, and then you make an agreement and hold each other accountable. One of the neat things that I've discovered with specifically asking questions is that oftentimes when you're asking questions, individuals are able to come up with the answer on their own. You're digging for understanding, and the answer seems to surface. Most of the time, people are not trying to be intentionally difficult. I know that it does happen, but as you're beginning to understand that person, that's actually what is lacking, that understanding. So you're beginning to understand that person, and in the process of understanding that person, a solution arises when you both come to that level of, this is what's going on here, and I can move forward with the solution with you, and we can hold each other accountable. It needs to be accountable in order for it to be something that's truly resolved. If you walk away from that conversation feeling good, but nobody ever follows up with it, nothing's ever done, you really haven't done anything. So I'd like to wrap up this training this afternoon, and I appreciate everyone's attention, and you've done a great job. I appreciate those who have been commenting in the chat. If anyone else has some comments about what they're saying, feel free to address that. But I do appreciate people interacting today. But I want to finally talk about email etiquette. We're going to have a few words about words. So one of the first things that we need to remember as it pertains to email etiquette is avoiding all caps and most slang. And this is when primarily when we're addressing a professional email. I understand that, there may be coworkers that we have, even in a supervisor-employee relationship where things are somewhat more informal. I understand that. I get that. You can continue to do that. But when we're addressing individuals outside of the organization, we cannot be using all caps. We cannot be using all slang. And you say, well, what about it? Matt, whoa, I'm not the greatest with email. I'm not the greatest with my grammar and composing these things. Go ahead and ask someone to proofread. Go ahead and ask questions, consult. Make sure that you're using the resource of your coworkers. Someone will be happy to help you out. Someone will be very honored that you asked them for help. So go ahead and do that. If nothing else, just shoot me an email and I'll take a look at it and give you some feedback. And I'm sure there's others on this call that would feel very comfortable doing that as well. The overuse of exclamation points, bold, underline, and italics actually void the emphasis that they're trying to create. So I have fallen into the trap of being an over exclamation point user. It's an issue that I have. I'm trying to quit and use the exclamation point when it actually is something I'm really excited about. So use it for those special moments of excitement. And then the same goes with bold and underlining and italicizing fonts. When we do this too often, when it becomes every other line, of course, it completely voids the emphasis that those features and those text options were meant to create. Being respectful with your tone. This almost goes out without saying, but we can have bad days and we can want to be, to use a technical term, we can want to be snarky at times. We can want to be short with people. Think about it. A good habit to get into. I actually heard this was a habit of, I believe it was Abraham Lincoln. He would, when he was mad, and he wrote a letter, he would actually put that letter in his drawer until the next day and then reread it. And if he felt like it needed to be sent at that time, he went ahead and sent it. If not, he would discard it. Oftentimes he ended up discarding most of those letters. And the same is true in our age of the internet, although it is even more easy to hit the send button, the tweet button, the post button, whatever it may be. Remember the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. If you would not appreciate a snarky email on a Friday afternoon, neither would anyone else. So make sure to be respectful in your tone. Be mobile friendly with short and concise messages. We have had some novel writers, some aspiring novel writers in our midst, and I marvel at their ability to put together an email, and that's a great thing. But that is not something, not a skill to be used in a professional setting. Oftentimes we are writing emails that will be read on a phone, that will be read in passing quickly. Research shows that you're not going to get people's attention for much more than a few lines for most emails. Be concise. To use a journalism term, don't bury the lead. What that means is don't put the most important thing down at the bottom. Put the most important thing right at the top. Make sure to be concise when you're writing those emails. So a few more words about email etiquette, and we're almost there. Thank you for your attention. Be careful when trying to be funny. I like to use humor from time to time. From time to time, people think it's funny, and from time to time, they don't. When it comes to email etiquette, it is very difficult. We don't have the inflection in our voice. We don't have body language. We don't have any of these things. And sometimes you may have a new relationship. Be careful when trying to be funny in emails. It just doesn't translate well in that medium. Salutations and closing should be professional and respectful. I'm not beating up on you if you've ever used this one, but one that has come up as an example is cheers. It's just, it's the term for making a toast. And like I said, you may have that informal relationship with someone and you want to use that. That could be okay, but in a professional setting, something like a closing like cheers, just keep it to thank you, have a nice day, have a great weekend, sincerely, best, anything like that is those are great options. Stay away from those ones that are a little bit more, I don't know exactly what they are, but just stay away from those as much as possible. We want to create a professional signature, and really this is easy for many of us as we have a company standard. We just follow the company standard and make sure that our signature aligns with that. And then use succinct subject lines. Use succinct subject lines. You don't have to write a book in your subject line. Your email should be short, but your subject line should not contain half of your short email. So just a few words to summarize what the email is all about. Here are some final words about words. Respond timely and appropriately. 24 hours is a good professional standard to keep in mind. When we tend to get outside of that, I like to include something like, I apologize that I didn't get to this right away, something like that. Maybe that's not always appropriate, but it's good. It's something good to keep in mind. Of course, I have allowed a number of emails in my professional career to get by me. If that happens, just admit to it, apologize, and just let everybody know that, yep, I missed this one, and, address the issue at hand. Proofread, proofread, proofread. It is incredibly critical that you're proofreading. And as I said earlier, if you need help, consult with a team member. So finally, persistence, the final P, persistence, the work truly pays off. Touched on this a number of times, but we will end there, that improving your communication skills will lead to profound results in your personal and professional life. I know this to be true. I've witnessed it. I've seen it. Improving my communication has gotten me raises, promotions, led to great opportunities that aren't necessarily professional or monetary, but that are very rich, important opportunities. And I just want to encourage you. I hope that this can be a springboard. I hope that this can be motivation for you to continue to improve communication in every area of your life. So that is the conclusion of this presentation.